During a safari retreat in South Africa, the tour guide smirked. What happens in the wild stays in the wild. I thought it was a joke, until I caught him sneaking into a luxury tent late at night. When he saw me, he chuckled. It's just the adventure. I smiled and tossed him a map. Then enjoy finding your way home alone. His face turned pale as he realized I had the only car keys. I've been sitting on this for a while. Thought maybe it wasn't worth sharing. Thought maybe I was being too dramatic, or maybe it was all in my head. But the truth is, it happened. It was real. And I still think about it way more than I should. This happened during what I thought would be a peaceful, reset my life kind of trip. I'm 43 male, recently divorced. Not one of those messy, court-battling kinds. It was mutual. We drifted, she met someone, and instead of dragging it out, we signed the papers, split our stuff, and that was that. I wasn't bitter. Not exactly. But I was tired. Real tired. So, I booked myself a trip. Not a cruise. Not a resort. I went all in and signed up for a safari retreat in Kruger National Park, South Africa. It was something I always wanted to do but kept putting off. I figured a couple weeks in the wild would be good for the soul. No emails, no obligations, no people asking me how I was really doing. Just animals, stars, and quiet. Turns out, I got the animals, but not much quiet. When I landed in Johannesburg, I was immediately struck by how damn hot it was. Like walking into an oven with bugs. But the staff was friendly, the air smelled like earth and dust, and I felt something I hadn't in a long time, calm. We took a small bush plane out to the lodge. Fancy place? Not over the top, but definitely not roughing it. Raised walkways, massive canvas tents with real beds, outdoor showers, even air conditioning if you wanted it. They greeted us with cocktails and cold towels. It was the kind of place where everything seemed perfect, until it wasn't. And that's when I met Ethan. He was the head guide. Late 30s, I'd guess. Tall, lean, tan like he lived under the sun year-round. Scruffy beard, kind of hair that looked like it never saw a brush but still looked good. He had that wild look, like a guy who slept under stars more than roofs. Confident in a way that wasn't loud, but you noticed it. And of course, every woman on the trip noticed it too. There were 12 of us. 3 couples, 2 older women traveling together, a honeymoon pair, 1 solo lady from Madrid named Celia, and me. Ethan stood in front of the group that first day, gave us a quick safety talk, then smirked and said, "Just remember, what happens in the wild, stays in the wild." Everyone chuckled. I smiled too. Thought it was a dumb line, but harmless. I didn't know yet how real that line would become. First few days went how you'd expect. Up at 5 a.m. for drives. Lions, zebras, giraffes, impalas. Saw a leopard drag a kill up a tree. It was the kind of thing you only see in documentaries. The guide team knew their stuff. Ethan led most of the drives and did the talking. He told stories about animal behavior, tracked fresh dung like a bloodhound, joked around at sundown when we had gin and tonics at the back of the truck. And yeah, he paid a lot of attention to Celia. At first, I didn't think anything of it. She was traveling alone, didn't talk much, kept to herself. Mid to late 30s. Pretty in a quiet way. Seemed smart, but reserved. I figured maybe he was just being nice. Tour guides are supposed to be friendly. But it wasn't just friendly. I started noticing little things. On the second night, I went out on the deck to look at the stars and saw them talking alone near the pool. She laughed too loud. He leaned in too close. Next morning, she sat next to him on the truck, only 6 seats, but she made sure it was next to him every time after that. Then came the night I couldn't ignore it anymore. It was around 2 a.m. I couldn't sleep. Jet lag, heat, or maybe the divorce ghost still rattling around in my brain. I grabbed a bottle of water and stepped out of my tent. The walkway was dimly lit, just enough to see your feet and not fall into the bush. I was heading toward the lounge tent to maybe read a book or sit with a whiskey, and that's when I saw movement. Ethan. Shirtless. Barefoot. Moving quietly, like he'd done this before. And he wasn't walking randomly, he was heading to Celia's tent. Now look. I'm not naive. People hook up on trips. I get it. It's not a church retreat. But there was something about it that felt wrong. He wasn't just a guest. He was staff. He was supposed to be leading us, protecting us, keeping us safe out there. And he was sneaking around, breaking rules. Using the power he had. The access. The trust. I stood there in the shadows and just watched. He glanced around before he slipped in. Didn't see me. I stood there a long time. Maybe 15 minutes. Eventually I went into the lounge, poured a drink, sat on the leather couch, and stared out at the dark bush. I wasn't mad. Just weirdly disappointed. An hour later he came out. smirking. Smug. Like a guy who just got away with something. He didn't see me sitting in the shadows behind the bar. Next morning, he acted like nothing happened. That's when it shifted for me. I didn't say anything. I didn't confront him. But I started watching. And what I saw confirmed everything. He'd pull her aside during walks. Helped her tie her scarf even though she clearly didn't need help. Let her sit up front even when others asked. He looked her like they had secrets. She looked at him like she was 17 again. I didn't care about their fling. But I started to think about what this guy was doing, and how easy it probably was for him to do it again. And again. Every trip. Every solo guest who thought the guide's attention was special. Maybe it was special. But I doubt it. One afternoon, we were getting ready for the drive. He walked up to the truck, saw me leaning on the hood. We were alone for a second. He gave me that same smug smile and said, "You enjoy the night sounds? Lot of things come alive after dark." I stared at him for a second, then said, "Rough night?" He grinned wider. Didn't deny anything. Just chuckled and said, "It's just the adventure, man." That's when I made a decision. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the laminated map they gave us at check-in. I tossed it toward him. "Then enjoy finding your way home alone." He looked confused. Then I held up the key fob. I had taken the keys to the only Land Cruiser on our side of the camp. His face dropped. No smile. No smirk. Just pale. I walked away without another word. So there I was. Walking away from Ethan, holding the only set of car keys like they were a grenade. I didn't even have a plan. I just knew I was tired of people like him. People who think they can do whatever they want because they've learned how to smile the right way. I went back to my tent. Didn't sleep, obviously. My hands were shaking from the adrenaline. I kept running through what I'd done. Was it over the line? Too petty? But the more I thought about it, the more I felt something I hadn't in a long time: control. That morning I got up early. Earlier than usual. I walked to the main lodge, grabbed coffee, and sat on the deck facing the bush. There was a heavy fog. The kind that makes everything look like it's hiding something. Eventually, people started waking up. Celia came out, hair tied up, sunglasses on even though the sun wasn't out yet. She didn't look at me. Then Ethan appeared. He looked tired. No hat. No radio clipped to his belt. His usual gear was missing. He scanned the area, locked eyes with me, then looked down. Said nothing. Our backup guide, a guy named Simon, came up behind him and casually asked, "You misplaced your ride this morning?" Ethan gave a weak smile and said he left something back at one of the lookout posts. It was a lie. Simon clearly didn't buy it, but he didn't push. Then came the real twist. While we were loading up into the trucks, the lodge manager, Ms. Malangu, an older woman who didn't talk much, called Ethan aside. I couldn't hear all of it, but I caught a few words. "Guest complaint, protocol, you were seen." Ethan nodded like a schoolboy caught cheating on a test. He didn't argue. Then, he left. Didn't even come with us on the drive. Just walked back toward the staff quarters. Celia looked panicked. She pulled Simon aside, whispered something. He just nodded and motioned her toward the truck. No one else seemed to notice what was going on, but it was boiling under the surface. That drive was awkward as hell. No jokes. No trivia about rhinos. No storytelling. Just silence and binoculars. When we got back to camp, I half expected my stuff to be packed up. Maybe they'd asked me to leave for stirring the pot. But instead, Simon came up to me while I was pouring a drink in the lounge. He looked around, then leaned in and said, "Whatever you did, it was probably overdue." That threw me. I asked him what he meant. He hesitated, then told me that Ethan had a history. That the lodge had received concerns, in the past. Solo female guests. Sudden changes in behavior. One woman even left early and never responded to follow-up emails. But no one had ever seen anything concrete. Until now. "People like him," Simon said. "They get really good at hiding. But eventually they get sloppy." I didn't know what to say. Simon paused, then added, "Don't be surprised if someone else tries to get in your head about this. Just stick to what you saw." I didn't understand what he meant at first. But the next day, it started. Around lunchtime, I was reading in the shaded hammock area near the pool when Celia approached me. She had a calm, polite tone. "Can I talk to you?" I sat up. She looked serious. Not angry. More like she was calculating. She said, "I know what you think you saw. But it wasn't like that." I didn't say anything. She continued. "It was mutual. No one got hurt. This place makes people feel things. Intense things." I kept my voice low and said, "He's staff. You're a guest. It doesn't matter if it felt real. Her eyes narrowed. You're not the morality police, I said. No, but I saw enough to know someone was abusing the setup. She scoffed, turned, and walked away. An hour later, I got called to the manager's office. Ms. Malanga sat behind the desk, hands folded. I want to be clear, she said. You are not in trouble. Okay. But I do need to tell you that Miss Celia came to us and said you threatened Ethan, withholding keys, blocking his ability to work. I blinked. Are you serious? She also said you made her feel unsafe. My stomach dropped. I told her exactly what happened. No dramatics. Just facts. She listened, nodded slowly, then leaned back and said, We believe you. This isn't the first time. Then she looked me dead in the eye and added, But this is the first time someone fought back. I asked what would happen to Ethan. She just said, He won't be returning for the next group. That wasn't enough for me. But I also knew this wasn't my fight anymore. I had done what I could. Or so I thought. Because 2 days later, someone went through my tent. It was early morning. I had gone for a sunrise walk with Simon and one other guest. When I came back, I noticed my tent zipper was unfastened at the bottom. Inside, everything looked mostly untouched, except my duffel bag. The side pocket was open. My passport was missing. I froze. At first I thought maybe I was losing my mind. But I know I zipped that pocket up the night before. I triple-check everything when I travel. Especially important documents. I tore the place apart. Nothing. Passport was gone. I went to the office, reported it. They searched the staff quarters. Searched the laundry area. Nothing. They told me I'd need to go to the embassy in Pretoria to get an emergency replacement. It'd take 3 days minimum. And I'd miss my flight home. I asked, Do you think Ethan took it? Ms. Malanga didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either. She said, Sometimes when people feel exposed, they retaliate in subtle ways. I knew then, I wasn't done with him. And he wasn't done with me. So now my passport was missing. No one saw anything. No one heard anything. But suddenly I was the guy whose documents just vanished, in the middle of a luxury safari lodge with 24/7 staff and cameras at the main gate. The weirdest part? The cameras showed nothing. I asked Ms. Malanga to check, and she did. I watched the footage with her. The angle didn't cover the tents directly, but you could see the pads. No one showed up walking near mine during that time frame. She said, If it was someone with access to the staff service pads, they'd know how to avoid this angle. She didn't say Ethan's name. She didn't have to. She promised to help with the embassy, and she did. But I still had to reschedule everything. I had to stay 3 extra nights in South Africa. Rebook my flights. File paperwork. Talk to 2 different consulate employees. Hours of my time gone, just gone. And here's the thing that kept me up at night. Nobody else's tent was touched. I asked casually around camp. Everyone still had their wallets. Their bags. Their keys. I even asked if anyone left a tent unzipped. One woman said she left hers wide open for hours and not a single thing was moved. That was the moment I realized something bigger. Someone wanted me to pay. And not just feel uncomfortable. Not just embarrassed. They wanted me stuck. That same afternoon, I was alone on the deck drinking lemon water when Simon came and sat next to me. Quietly. No greetings. He reached into his backpack, pulled out a sealed envelope, and placed it on the table. What's this? I found it under a chair in the staff truck. He said. I opened it. My passport. Just sitting there. In perfect condition. No dirt. No scratches. No explanation. Simon leaned forward and said, That truck hasn't moved in 2 days. You think someone dropped this by accident? I didn't answer. He kept going. I shouldn't even be telling you this, but Ethan was spotted sneaking back onto the property yesterday. Said he was just collecting his last paycheck. But no one saw him leave. And just like that, my stomach dropped. I asked, Why wasn't security told? They were. But he knew where the blind spots were. He trained half the new guys. Then Simon said something I'll never forget. If he's still here, be careful. That night I barely slept. I pushed a chair against the inside of my tent door. I kept the flashlight close. The sounds outside were louder than usual. Crickets. Distant hyenas. Branches cracking in the wind. Around 1:30 a.m., I heard footsteps. Soft. Careful. Coming from the staff trail behind my tent. I froze. The steps stopped right at the back corner, where the canvas meets the floorboards. A shadow moved, barely visible through the thin moonlight shining through the fabric. Then, silence. I waited. Breath held. Eyes locked on the zipper. Nothing. I stayed awake until sunrise. The next morning, I went straight to the office and asked for a different tent. They gave me one on the other side of camp, near the security shack. They didn't ask why. They didn't need to. Celia was gone. Left that morning. No goodbye. No explanation. Just vanished from the breakfast list. Simon told me she requested an unscheduled airport transfer before sunrise. She didn't even wait for the rest of the tour to end. Packed her bags while it was still dark. That same day, I saw a camp staffer quietly removing Ethan's photo from the staff wall in the lodge. Not ripping it off. Peeling it carefully. Like they wanted to erase the fact that he'd ever been there. The final twist? That night, back in the new tent, I was unpacking my stuff when I noticed something odd inside the front pocket of my bag. It was a note. Handwritten. Just 2 sentences. You're not better than me. You just played your card first. No name. No signature. Just a dirty, folded scrap of paper shoved between my t-shirts. I didn't report the note. Maybe I should have. But I didn't. At that point, part of me wanted to see how far he'd go. I was scared, yeah, but I was also angry. Angry that someone like Ethan could move through the world unchecked for so long. Charming his way past boundaries. Turning accountability into some kind of personal attack. Hiding behind that smirk. I kept the note. Folded it back up, tucked it under my mattress. Just in case. The next day was the last full day of the retreat. Most of the guests were packing or out on the final evening drive. I stayed behind. I said I wasn't feeling great. Truth was, I wanted to be alone. But alone doesn't last long in a place like that. Late afternoon, I was in the library tent. Just me, the fan overhead spinning slow, and a cup of tea I wasn't drinking. That's when I heard footsteps again. This time, heavier. I stood up just as Ethan walked in. He looked different. Unshaven. Pale. Clothes wrinkled. And that stupid leather hat he always wore? Gone. He shut the flap behind him and said, "We need to talk." I didn't answer. He took a step forward. "You think you're the good guy in all this?" Still, I said nothing. Then he snapped. "You don't know what that girl was going through. You think I preyed on her? She wanted to feel alive again. She told me everything. You don't know her like I do." I kept my voice low. "You were her guide. Not her therapist. Not her boyfriend. She didn't owe you anything, and neither did I." He stepped closer. "You humiliated me. In front of the entire staff. In front of her." I didn't flinch. "You humiliated yourself." I just held up the mirror. And then it happened. Simon stepped into the tent. He'd been behind the canvas wall. Reading, apparently. Or maybe waiting. He looked Ethan dead in the eye and said, "You need to go. Now." Ethan turned to him. "You don't get it. I built this place. You'd still be guiding school kids through the bush if it weren't for me." Simon said nothing. Just picked up the radio and clicked a button. Security showed up less than a minute later. 2 guys. Calm, quiet, ready. Ethan looked at me, one last time, and said, "You think you won? But this isn't over." And he was gone. The camp went quiet after that. Like it was holding its breath. The guests never knew what happened. They assumed he'd left early. Celia's name wasn't brought up again. But behind the scenes, people talked. Ms. Malonga called me into her office before I left. She thanked me. Not in a warm, hug-it-out way. But in that quiet, measured tone of someone who's seen too much to be surprised anymore. "He left a trail," she said. "You just turned on the light." She told me that after I reported the missing passport, she dug deeper. Spoke to other lodges. Compared notes. There were other women. Other coincidences. Other complaints that were never followed up on. But this time, they had evidence. The note, the confrontation, the cameras. Simon's report. My account. They were passing it up the chain. I don't know what will happen to Ethan legally. Maybe nothing. Maybe a slap on the wrist. Maybe one of the other victims will come forward now. But at least he's not out there, guiding anymore. The plane ride home was long. I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about Celia. I don't know her story. I don't know what she was running from or toward. I don't even know if she ever really saw Ethan for who he was. Or maybe she did, and that's what she wanted in the moment. All I know is, it didn't feel like love. Not even lust. It felt like escape. And I get that. God, do I get that. After a divorce, you feel invisible. People look through you. Like you're damaged. Like you've failed at the one thing you're supposed to be able to hold together. Maybe Celia saw someone paying attention. Maybe Ethan saw someone vulnerable, and I saw someone getting away with something, again. And I couldn't let it slide. I got home and put the note in a drawer. I kept it. I don't know why. Not out of fear. More like proof. That sometimes doing the right thing feels horrible in the moment. That you don't get a parade for stepping up. You get silence. And side eyes. And cold coffee on the plane ride home. But you also get something else. You get to live with yourself. So here's what I learned. Sometimes people don't show their true selves until the mask slips. And when it does, it's fast, and it's ugly. Sometimes no one will believe you, until someone finally does. And sometimes, being the only one to speak up makes you the enemy for a while. But I'd rather be that guy than the one who looked the other way. Am I hopeful now? I don't know. I'm not bitter. I'm not scared. But I'm not naive anymore either. Maybe that's what healing really is. Not peace. Just truth. And learning how to carry it.